Hi there. Thank you very much for participating in this first meeting. My name is Dan McCarthy. I'm from Southeastern Louisiana University. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to why this is even happening and how it came about. I was a member of the First Management and Leadership Institute a few years ago, and we're still very closely in touch. We keep in contact a lot. And so just after the murder of George Floyd, one of the members of the group hosted something. It was Ked Nicholas from Nicholas State saying, look, guys, we talk about a lot of things, but why are we not talking about this right now? And he brought up a great point. And so people did start communicating, and it was a very difficult thing to do. It was very emotional, as you can imagine. And a lot of people just it almost wanted to say things, didn't know how to say things. And so I kind of had this thought that maybe if we took a book and read the book and then discussed that, that would maybe help to open up some ideas here. So the book I chose, as you know, is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. The reason I do have some familiarity with that is my father actually taught Black American literature for 30 years. So I'm not claiming to be an authority at any level, but I was familiar with some of these books and had read them. And so I thought that'd be a really good book to move people way out of their comfort zones into a very difficult thing and start some discussions here. And the reason I did go with fiction as opposed to a sort of a nonfiction book about racism is I think one thing great literature does, it really makes you examine your own thoughts within yourself. And I'm hoping that is going to come out tonight in some of the discussions we're going to have. One of the problems with this is that I'm not an English professor. In fact, I am a physics professor. So I am hardly not qualified to lead a discussion about a great piece of literature, especially this book here. Fortunately for us, we within our universities, we do happen to have an expert on Toni Morrison, and that would be Dr. Holly Stave from Northwestern State University. She's a professor of English there in, I believe, the Scholars College, and is, among other things, is also a Toni Morrison expert. So I'm going to hand it over to Holly and let the expert take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you to the committee for asking me to do this. It's a delight to talk about Morrison any chance I get. As all of you no doubt know, Toni Morrison was the first African-American woman to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. What some of you may not know is that she did not publish her first novel, The Bluest Eye, until she was 39 years old. Raised in the mixed race and multi-ethnic town of Lorain, Ohio, which is where this novel is set, she took her undergraduate degree from Howard University and her MA from Cornell University. After several years of teaching, Morrison began working as a textbook editor, working her way up to become an editor at Random House, and specifically focusing on bringing works by African American writers into the public eye. Morrison grounds this novel in her experiences as a girl, growing up in a supportive family, but haunted by the memory of a childhood friend telling her that she longed for blue eyes. Several decades later, having read and edited so many works by so many other African American writers, Morrison began her lifelong exploration of how racial self-hatred happens, as well as the vexing matter of the internal color line, the process by which dark-skinned Black people are shunned by lighter-skinned Black people. In this novel, if you think about the characters Geraldine and what Morrison calls the high yellow dream child, Maureen Peel. Morrison claimed that she wrote the kind of books she wanted to read. Understandably, she was tired of never seeing herself reflected in much of the literature she had read, so she chose to ground her novels in Black life in the U.S. In the course of her writing, she covers ground from the colonial period through the early 21st century, often locating her texts at significant moments in the racial history of the U.S. White people appear in her text, but with the exception of her novel Tar Baby, they are never main characters, which is not to say they don't play a vital role in the lives of the Black people with whom they interact. All we have to think about here is Charlie Breedlove's experience during his sexual initiation with Doreen. In The Bluest Eye, I would argue that Claudia, recounting the events of the one year in her childhood when Pecola Breedlove became a fixture in her life, can be read as perhaps speaking in Morrison's own voice at times, weighing in on the guilt she feels in the undoing of Pecola, as well as coming to some conclusions about the cultural forces that drove Pecola's obsession. However, in Morrison's works, attempting to understand acts of violence and viciousness lead her to allowing readers into the minds of her most reprehensible characters, such as Charlie Breedlove, which puts us as readers in the position of needing to denounce the rape of his daughter while simultaneously feeling sympathy for him, a situation that it infuriates my students who simply want to hate him for his actions. Morrison, I would argue, is never sentimental. She is horrified by evil, even as she understands how evil happens. As she said of her character Setha in her most well-known novel, Beloved, Setha kills her baby girl to prevent her to being returned to slavery. And Morrison said, it was the right thing to do, but she had no right to do it, which really gets at the complexity of reading Morrison and the way she plays with language to really make us consider what her words might mean. Since all of you have read the novel, I'm not going to do a plot summary. And because I want your discussion to thrive, I'm not going to impose my own reading on the text. However, what I would like to do is raise some matters that might inspire discussion and call attention to some you might have overlooked. Obviously, your purpose here is to focus on cultural diversity, and starting with the novel about little Black girls who are in the process of being educated is an excellent jumping off point. So perhaps one opening question would be to consider what Claudia, Frida, and Pecola are learning. Where does their knowledge come from? What do we glean about their time at school? Morrison begins her novels with the words of a first grade reader that some of us are old enough to remember. It tells the story of Dick and Jane, who live in a nice house with kind parents, a dog, and a cat. Throughout the novel, Morrison returns to the words of the primer, each time effectively speeding up the reading by removing punctuation marks and spacing. So readers must begin where she begins and ask what her purpose was in choosing this particular book. How does this interact with the narrative that relates the lives of three little girls and the people around them? What is immediately obvious, of course, is that Dick and Jane and their family are white, but Black elementary school children would have likely been taught to read from this very book. Next, we must consider why, when the text returns to the words of the primer, Morrison chooses to alter them the way she does. How does that impact you individually as the reader? With any intradiegetic narrator, what we used to call first-person narration, we must also ask questions about the narrative voice. Significant portions of this work are told in Claudia's words when she is an adult, but how do we know she is an adult? What are the narrative signifiers that indicate that? Why did Morrison wait for her to be an adult to tell this story? Parts are told through the voice of Pauline. How does this change our perception of her from what we have gleaned through other parts of the work, specifically from Claudia's narrative? Charlie's sections, however, are told from an extra-diegetic perspective, a so-called omniscient narrator. How is Morrison's purpose served in not letting Charlie tell his own story? And then there is the section of the book that deals with Soaphead Church, likely the most vexing part of the novel, because his status as a storyteller is complicated. We also have to explore the conversation Pecola has at the end of the novel. With whom is she speaking? What is implied by this conversation? The book is structured around the seasons of the year, which are obviously cyclical, always returning us to where we began. What does the narrative gain, if it does, by such a structure? At the same time, the novel is set at a time period when World War II is underway in Europe. We need to interrogate the play of the natural time, the seasons, with the chronological time heading into war. At the same time, one of the prostitutes in the novel is called the Maginot Line. Obviously, Morrison chose to have her called that for a reason. And while we're at it, how did the prostitutes figure into this narrative in the first place? What is their purpose here? Morrison also highlights popular culture in the narrative: Shirley Temple, baby dolls, movies, the blues, among others. Not only do these references ground the novel in a specific historical time period, Shirley Temple, for example, but they are consumed by Black girls and women. Why do the McTeers have a Shirley Temple cup in their house? What goes on in Pauline's head when she goes to the movies? Consider Claudia's problem with the baby dolls and Mrs. McTeer's singing the blues. Social class is important here, obviously. What are the markers that indicate where the McTeers land in the social stratification of the novel? What about the Breedloves? How do the two families differ, and how might or might not economics tie into those differences? How does the issue of seeing the father naked with all its biblical overtones play into the lives of all the girls? Morrison said early in her career that she wasn't a feminist, that she didn't want to be labeled by any kind of ism. I would point out that after a while, she stopped making that claim. But even in this first work, it is worthwhile to consider gendered implications. For example, Sammy's reaction to his nightmarish home life compared to Pacola's choices when dealing with the same scenario. What about Pauline's employment? Charlie's. As you discuss this novel, I hope you will at times back away from treating it like a sociological document of Black life prior to World War II, and let the language of this magnificent writer take your breath away. Let yourself enter the lives of Claudia and Freedom as they contemplate which is worse, a whipping or eating turnips. Be in that kitchen with them when Pauline Breedlove comforts the terrified white child while ignoring her own child who is burned by the hot cobbler. Share Pacola's humiliation at Geraldine's words and the words of the boys on the playground. This is what good literature can give us, the ability to live lives other than our own, and to then open our hearts and minds to really see others apart from how they factor into our lives. Thank you so much.
Sorry. I'm Dr. Donna Thomas. I'm Department Chair for Psychology and Behavioral Sciences at Louisiana Tech University. And I'm also a member of MLI 3, the third cohort of the University of Louisiana System Management and Leadership Institute. Our cohort's journey was interrupted, like everything else, in March of 2020 by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're excited to finish that at some point, we hope this next year. I want to thank y'all for the opportunity to introduce the next book in the ULS MLI Book Club. Our next discussion will take place on October 8th. I'm particularly excited about this book because it is written by a psychologist, so someone from my trade, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. Dr. Tatum is a scholar. She is President Emerita of Spelman College, and also the 2014 recipient of the American Psychological Association's Outstanding Lifetime Contributor, which is the highest award that APA gives. And she's also an expert on racial identity and inequality. So certainly well qualified to speak to racism and inequality as we're talking about during this series. So with no further ado, on behalf of MLI 3, I want to introduce the book. It's called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race. It is in part based on Dr. Tatum's research, but it's also her own poignant story, and those are woven together in a beautiful way. It was originally written in 1997, but it's been revised a number of times, most recently in 2017. So it's very timely, very relevant for the conversations that we're having. I look forward to reading it actually for the second time myself, and I encourage you to get a copy and be ready to discuss this, as I said, when we meet the next time on October 8th. Thanks, everybody, and stay well.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you participating, and I hope you have a great breakout in the discussion rooms. You now will be sent to individual discussion rooms, and enjoy, and we'll hopefully see you next time too.